poor girl sheltered a cowboy and his son. She never knew he was a hidden millionaire. On a snowy mountain swallowed by winter's silence, a small cabin stood alone beneath the weight of ice and wind. Inside, a poor young woman stirred a pot of thin soup, the weak flame flickering shadows across her tired face. The house was still, only the howl of the wind and the faint clink of a spoon against an iron pot broke the quiet. Then 3 sharp knocks echoed through the storm. Firm, urgent, cutting through the night like fate itself. Clara froze. Her heart raced as her trembling hand reached for the old gun beside the door. Who could possibly find this place buried deep in snow and silence? Step by cautious step, she approached, her breath mingling with the cold mist curling through the cracks. When she opened the door, the storm rushed in along with destiny. A weary cowboy stood there, a young boy limp in his arms, their faces pale from the cold. His voice was rough, barely a whisper. "Please, just one night." She hesitated, then stepped aside. Firelight bloomed once more, chasing the frost from their skin. A bowl of stew, a fragile smile and warmth slowly returned to the world. But when dawn came, a secret was left behind, a golden watch engraved with a noble name. Fear replaced the fragile trust. Before she could ask, the man and his son had already vanished, riding back into the blinding storm. Clara stood by the door, heartbreaking, unaware that the stranger she had taken in was heir to an empire, and that those 3 desperate knocks were only the beginning. Scene 1: 3 knocks in the snowstorm. That night the mountain seemed swallowed by wind and ice. Gusts howled through the rocky ridges, carrying the mournful cries of the pine forest and a cold that cut straight to the bone. Snow kept falling heavy, relentless, each flake sharp as a blade sinking deep into the frozen ground. Amid the desolation, a small wooden cabin stood alone, its dim light flickering through the window like a frail candle lost in a sea of white. Inside, Clara wrapped an old shawl tighter around her shoulders. The pot on the stove bubbled softly, releasing the faint scent of potatoes and wild herbs, a fragile warmth against the biting chill. She had lived alone through 2 winters since her father passed. This cabin, once filled with laughter and the clatter of wood, now knew only the whisper of the wind and the sound of her own breathing. Outside, the storm was growing stronger. Each time the wind struck the walls, the cabin shuddered. Clara stirred her soup in silence, the firelight dancing in her weary eyes. She had grown used to solitude, used to never expecting anyone, especially on nights like this. But then, through the moan of the wind, there came 3 knocks, firm, low, and deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. The sound struck through her chest, sending her heart racing. Clara lifted her head, listening. The wind howled again, scraping against the chimney as if trying to erase the noise. Perhaps she'd imagined it. Then 3 more knocks, louder this time, like a plea against the wooden door. Knock, knock, knock. Clara froze. No one could reach this mountain in winter except perhaps wild animals. She took a step back, her hand brushing against the gun rack on the wall. Her father's old Winchester still hung there, cold but steady, the only thing she could trust. The wind struck again, rattling the cabin and scattering ash into the air. Gripping the gun tightly, Clara crept toward the frosted window. With the back of her hand, she wiped away the thin layer of ice and peered outside. Darkness, snow twisting in pale spirals. And then she saw it. A figure. A tall man, coat heavy with snow, hunched against the storm. In his arms, a small child head resting limply on his shoulder body, weak and still. Behind them, 2 horses trembled, their breath forming clouds in the frozen air. Clara's heartbeat thundered. It was too vivid to be a trick of the light. She stepped back, her breath quick and uneven. For a moment, memories flooded back of the bootleggers who once came by laughing, stealing food, leaving her terrified. Her grip tightened around the gun. But then she saw the man's shoulders shaking. His face was lowered, not in threat, but in silent pleading. "Dear Lord," Clara whispered, her voice barely a breath. 3 more knocks, weaker this time. Then a rough, cracked voice carried by the wind. "Please, open the door. The boy, he's freezing." She stood still, fingers numb around the barrel. Between two heartbeats, she could hear it, her own breath, and the faint rhythm of a child's desperate heart outside. Who are they, her cautious mind warned. But if it's real, that boy might die. Another voice answered. She remembered her father's words. In a snowstorm, to refuse a soul in need is a sin. Clara took a deep breath. Her hand loosened on the trigger. Step by step, she walked to the door. The wind hissed through the cracks as if trying to hold her back. But she unlatched the lock anyway. The metal clicked dryly in the silence just as thunder rolled outside. The door burst open. A wave of wind slammed into her, laced with snow and biting cold. The fire behind her flickered wildly, casting trembling shadows on the walls. The man stood there, eyes hidden beneath the brim of his hat, voice hoarse and broken. Please, just one night. His tone was like dry earth cracking, rough, desperate. In his arms, the boy, no older than 8, lay, limp lips, blue eyelids half closed. Clara saw the child's small, trembling hand, pale as paper. She didn't think anymore, only acted. Come in, she said quickly, pulling the door wider. The man stepped inside, the storm swirling in with him. Snow spilled across the threshold, curling around their boots. When the door finally shut, the world outside disappeared, leaving only the breath of 3 people inside a tiny cabin. He stood still, breathing hard, melting snow running down his coat. Clara pointed to the fire. Lay him near the hearth. He nodded, kneeling by the flames. She grabbed the only blanket she had, the one her mother had sewn years ago, and wrapped it around the boy. Thank you. His voice cracked, dry and hollow. Clara said nothing. She watched the child shiver, color slowly returning to his cheeks. She ladled some soup from the pot, blew on it, and handed it to the man. His large hand shook as he took it. In that moment, she noticed something. Those hands, though rough and calloused, held the boy with a gentleness that carried the weight of the world. In his eyes, there was no danger, only fear and love. The firelight reflected on his face, weary, weathered, yet marked by a deep, quiet sorrow. Clara glanced at the boy again. His breathing steadied, his eyelids fluttered. He'll be all right, she whispered half to herself. The man nodded. Thank you, ma'am. So simple, and yet something in his voice softened her heart. She set the gun back on the rack and returned to the stove, feeding more wood into the fire. The cabin began to glow again, golden light spreading over the cold wooden floor. Outside, the blizzard still roared, but inside only the slow, steady rhythm of 3 breaths filled the room. Clara looked out through the frosted window. The snow seemed to fall more gently now, as though even the storm had calmed. For the first time in months, the cabin wasn't silent as a grave. There was life again, breath, warmth, and the faint sound of hearts beating with the fire's crackle. Clara's gaze lingered on the wooden door, where the faint marks of snow still clung. And in that moment, she understood sometimes just 3 knocks in the heart of a storm can change a life forever. Scene 2. The fire and the first bowl of soup. The wind still howled outside, but inside the small cabin, the storm seemed to have stopped. The door was shut, and with it, the freezing world beyond was held at bay. Only the crackle of burning wood and the heavy breaths of the stranger and his child filled the room. Clara sat by the stove, hand wrapped around the ladle, stirring the pot of simmering soup. The scent of potatoes, dried beans, and a bit of salted meat mingled with the steam, spreading warmth through the room. That pot was supposed to last her 2 more days, but now she didn't care. The sight of the little boy curled against his father's chest softened her heart, melting the ice she had carried inside for so long. The man, a cowboy by the look of him, sat silently beside his son, eyes taut with worry, as if letting go for even a second would mean losing the boy forever. His coat was soaked, broad shoulders trembling from the cold. Beneath his rough beard, his features were strong, but exhaustion carved deep lines across them. Clara watched them quietly before saying, "Take off your coat, you'll catch a chill if you don't." He looked up, wary at first, then gave a small nod. His voice was hoarse, worn thin by wind and frost. "Thank you, and ma'am." Just 3 words, simple, plain, yet in them. Clara heard something familiar, the honesty of a man who had known loss. He set his heavy coat on the floor, melting snow dripping from its edges, and gently tucked the blanket around his child. Clara stirred the pot and poured the soup into 2 chipped porcelain bowls. "Eat something," she said softly. "You need your strength." He shook his head. "For the boy first." Clara looked at the child. His lips trembled, eyelids fluttering faintly. She scooped a spoonful of broth, blew on it, and touched it to his lips. At first there was no reaction, then the boy's mouth parted, accepting the warmth. She smiled. "He'll be all right." The man looked at her, and in that moment the firelight revealed his eyes, deep, tired, and full of gratitude. The boy whimpered softly, then opened his eyes. They were blue, clear as a summer sky. He glanced around confused and murmured, "Papa, where are we?" His voice was weak but clear, the voice of a child raised with care. "In a safe place now, son?" The man replied gently. Clara poured another small bowl and handed it to the boy. "Have some soup, it'll warm you up." He looked at her shyly, then whispered, "Thank you, ma'am." The simple words caught Clara off guard. It had been so long since she'd heard a child's voice in this house. She nodded, smiling faintly. The boy ate slowly, 1 spoonful at a time, color returning to his cheeks. The man, though his large hands still trembled with cold, stayed silent, eyes fixed on his son's every movement. When the boy finally looked up and whispered, "It's really good," the man exhaled deeply, weary but relieved. Clara poured the rest of the soup into the second bowl and pushed it toward him. "This one's for you." He hesitated, wanting to refuse, but her look left no room for argument. Finally, he lowered his head and said quietly, "I owe you more than I can repay." Clara's reply was soft, like the crack of firewood in the stove. "Out here, we all owe someone a little kindness." Silence settled between them, gentle, unspoken. Only the sound of snow against the roof, the distant cry of the wind, and the steady rhythm of breathing filled the space. The firelight painted their shadows on the wall, the man sitting still, the boy wrapped in a blanket, and the young woman tending the pot. 3 souls, 3 small flames, keeping one another alive through the storm. Clara's gaze drifted toward the coat drying near the door. She noticed the fine stitching on its collar, too refined for a common ranch hand. The boots too worn, covered in snow, but once expensive. A flicker of curiosity stirred within her, but she pushed it aside. Survival came first. She stood and added more wood to the fire. The flames flared brighter, bathing the room in gold. Their skin glowed warm under the light, their breath no longer trembling from the cold. Clara could hear the boy's faint heartbeat, steady now, blending with her own. The man spoke, his voice low, almost a confession. "We got lost. One of the horses was near spent, and then the wind turned. I thought we wouldn't make it through the night." Clara met his eyes, her tone gentle. "But you did. Maybe God still has work for you to do." He gave a tired smile, small but genuine. "Maybe so." Outside, the snow still fell, but softer now, no longer wild. The storm was fading. Inside, the warmth spread, the scent of burning wood mingling with the earthy aroma of soup. Clara fetched another blanket and draped it over his shoulders. He blinked, surprised, then nodded gratefully. "You live alone?" he asked. She nodded, eyes still fixed on the fire. "Since my father passed. This cabin's all he left me." He was silent for a long moment, then said quietly, "He raised you right." A sad smile touched her lips. He said, "Kindness is the only fire strong enough to survive a blizzard." The words lingered between them. He looked at her, really looked as if something inside him had just been stirred. The firelight danced in their eyes. Outside, the night still wrapped the mountain in cold silence, but within that little cabin time seemed to slow. Each curl of smoke, each shimmer of heat over the steaming bowls was proof that warmth still existed, that goodness, however small, could stand against the fiercest storm. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in deeply. The scent of hot soup, melting snow, and burning wood blended into something simple, something alive. That night no one spoke again. They just sat there, sharing warmth and silence. But in that silence, something had changed. She no longer felt afraid. He no longer felt lost, and the boy slept soundly, his breath steady and warm, and the fire small, though it was burned bright all through the night. Scene 3. 3 days of shelter. The next morning, snow still blanketed the valley. The wind outside hadn't stopped completely, but the storm had softened now, only a whispering hum weaving through the mountain cliffs. The sky was pale silver, its dim light filtering through the frosted window panes. Clara awoke to the crackle of firewood and the faint scent of smoke mingled with weak coffee. The little cabin felt warmer than it had in years. She pulled the blanket from her shoulders and looked around. The stranger, the cowboy, was kneeling by the hearth, feeding wood into the flames. The boy, Tommy, still slept, curled beneath a thick blanket, his tousled blonde hair glowing softly in the light. The scene was so peaceful, so natural, it almost felt as though they had always belonged there. Clara smiled to herself, wondering why her heart felt so full. Perhaps it was the sound of breathing, not just her own, or perhaps simply the comfort of knowing she wasn't alone that morning. "You're up early," she said, her voice still husky with sleep. He looked up, the firelight softening his rugged face. "Habit, ma'am. I'm used to rising with the sun." "Here," she said with a faint grin. "You can't tell the sun from the night." He smiled, a rare, quiet smile. "As long as there's a fire burning, every day is different from the night." His words lingered in the air. A man of few sentences, yet every one of them seemed to land heavy and true, like an axe striking clean through wood. When Tommy woke, Clara had already toasted a few leftover biscuits. The boy rubbed his eyes and sat up, voice still thick with dreams. "Papa, I dreamed Mama was singing." The man froze for a moment, then replied softly, "Maybe she's smiling now, seeing you still here." Clara's heart tightened. There was more than love in his voice. There was grief, old and unhealed. After breakfast, the man asked, "Could I borrow your father's axe?" Clara nodded toward the corner where a worn axe leaned against the wall. "It's a little dull," she warned. "That'll do," he said, rolling up his sleeves and reaching for his hat. When he opened the door, a rush of cold air swept in, laced with pine and snow. From the window, Clara watched him step out into the white yard. The snow reached halfway up his boots. He set a log on the chopping block, raised the axe high, and brought it down. Thud. The sound was sharp and certain, echoing across the silent mountainside. It had been so long since she'd heard that sound, the rhythm of an axe splitting wood, the heartbeat of a living home. She stood watching him work, tall, steady, every motion sure and practiced. The blade rose and fell with measured strength, snow spraying up around him like glass dust, and when a shy beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, it flashed bright against the steel. Outside, Tommy darted about, laughing, cheeks flushed pink. "Miss Clara, look, your hen laid an egg." Clara laughed, startled. "An egg? This time of year?" The boy cupped the tiny white egg in both hands, proud and gentle. "Papa says when a hen lays in winter, it means the house is blessed." Then maybe, she said, smiling, blessings came with the storm. When Nathaniel, she had finally learned his name, finished chopping the first stack of wood, Clara brought him a bowl of warm water. He took it in his broad, cracked hands, the tiny bowl almost vanishing in his grip. "Thank you," he murmured. "This should keep you warm for a few days." "You're leaving so soon?" she asked quietly. He glanced toward the horizon, wind brushing the damp hair from his forehead. "No, the horses need rest. So does the boy. We'll stay. 3 days. Then we'll move on." Clara said nothing. Her eyes lingered on the neat pile of firewood stacked beside the wall. She remembered her father splitting logs the same way, the sound of winter, the sound of life. And now that rhythm had returned, not from her father's hands, but from this stranger's breathing warmth back into her home. By afternoon, the snow had stopped. The valley shimmered under a silver haze. Clara hung the wet clothes by the fire while Nathaniel and Tommy mended the old fence outside. The boy sang while he worked, his small voice bright against the quiet mountains, and Clara couldn't help but laugh. "He's got a good voice," she said when Nathaniel came back inside. He smiled faintly. "That's his mother's. I only ever knew how to listen." Something flickered in his eyes, sorrow maybe, but it faded like smoke. Clara poured him more coffee, the steam rising between them, softening the world. That evening they sat together around the fire. Clara shared stories of her father, of winters survived, of small joys that kept her going. Tommy listened with wide eyes while Nathaniel sat quietly. His rough hands folded, his gaze warm and distant. The little cabin, once silent and cold, now rang with laughter. A boy's bright giggle, a man's low chuckle, and the soft laughter of a woman rediscovering her own voice. Clara hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd laughed, and how good it felt. Outside, the wind still moved through the trees, but it no longer sounded cruel. Inside, the fire cast its golden glow over three faces. Three strangers drawn together, looking for all the world like a family. Tommy soon fell asleep in the chair, humming his unfinished song. Clara pulled a blanket over him, then turned to Nathaniel. "He'll be all right," she said. He nodded, voice low. "Thank you for opening the door that night." Her throat tightened. "If I hadn't," she whispered, "I might never have heard laughter in this house again." They sat in silence. The wood popped softly, smoke curling gently through the air, carrying the scent of pine and warmth. After a while, Clara said quietly, "You know, that sound of your axe this morning, it reminded me of my father. I thought I'd never hear it again." Nathaniel smiled, the kind of smile that reached the eyes. "The sound of an axe means life, ma'am. As long as someone's splitting wood, there's still warmth in the world." Clara met his gaze, eyes shimmering. She didn't answer, just turned to the fire and added another log. The flames leapt higher, crackling in agreement. That night, the last of the storm passed. Moonlight spilled faintly through the window, silvering the faces of the three sleeping souls by the fire. Clara watched them for a moment, father and son breathing softly, then rested her head back against the chair. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of winter anymore. Scene 4. The story told at midnight night. Settled quietly. Outside, the wind had gone still. The storm had passed, though snow still drifted down in soft, aimless flakes, cold dust floating in the dark. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers that cast a faint, flickering light across two wakeful faces. Tommy was fast asleep, his breathing slow and steady, his small face buried in warmth. The house was so silent that Clara could hear the soft patter of snow against the window. She sat in her wooden chair, hands wrapped around a cup of hot tea, eyes resting on the dying flame. Across from her, Nathaniel sat quietly, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. His gaze was fixed on the small fire, the red coals glowing weakly between the ashes. The shadows swallowed most of his face, but the light still caught the weariness in his eyes. For a long while, neither spoke. Only the faint crackle of wood breaking filled the silence like the last breaths of a fading warmth. Clara spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace. "You're not sleeping." He shook his head slightly, not used to a warm bed. She smiled faintly and set her cup down. "The boy's sleeping soundly. He takes after you." Nathaniel glanced toward his son. A small smile touched his lips, though his eyes softened with something heavier. "He's more like his mother, gentle, grateful for little things, just like she was." Clara stayed silent, hearing both tenderness and sorrow in his voice. She didn't ask, but the words seemed to come to him anyway, drawn out by the dim fire that invited old memories to surface. "She died almost a year ago," he said quietly, "during the birth of our second child." Clara tilted her head, her eyes glimmering in the low light. He paused, swallowed, then continued. "The baby didn't make it either." Silence fell again. Clara could hear the faint whistle of wind slipping through the cabin walls, a sound like a sigh. Nathaniel's head bowed. "I used to think, if I'd had more money, if I hadn't taken her so far from home, maybe things would have been different. But I learned no amount of money can hold on to someone you love." His voice roughened, breaking at the edges. "So I left it all behind, the land, the house, the work, everything. All I took was him." I wanted him to grow up not behind the cold walls of the rich, but where he could love the simple things, the snow, the wind, the fire, and the kindness of strangers. Clara looked at him for a long time. She hadn't expected that the rough, quiet cowboy before her carried such deep pain. But in his eyes, she saw something familiar, the same loneliness that had haunted her own life for years. She remembered the winter her father died, how the cabin had turned into a tomb of silence. No laughter, no voice, only her and the wind surviving through the long, cold nights with nothing but stillness. Now looking at Nathaniel, she felt as though she were seeing her own reflection, a wounded soul trying to stay kind despite the scars. "You must miss her." "Terribly," she said softly. Nathaniel didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the fire, the faint light trembling across his face. "Every day," he said at last. "But I can't let that sorrow become a weight for my boy. He deserves to see me smile." Clara pressed her lips together. The truth in his words touched something deep inside her. Without thinking, she reached out her fingers, brushed against his hand resting on his knee. His hand was large, rough, calloused from years of work. He didn't pull away. The warmth of his skin spread through her fingers, up her arm to her heart, a warmth born not of fire, but of shared grief, of understanding. They sat there in silence. No words were needed. Only the slow rhythm of breathing, the soft fall of snow outside, and the gentle flicker of dying embers between them. Clara spoke again, voice trembling slightly. "I lost my father in a winter like this. I thought I'd die with the loneliness that came after. Until the night you knocked on my door." Nathaniel turned toward her, a faint light stirring in his eyes. "Maybe. We were both saved by the same fire." Clara smiled, a tear slipped down her cheek without her noticing. She didn't wipe it away. The warmth of it felt strangely good. The fire burned low, its last embers glowing faintly red. Yet that small light endured, steady, alive, like the heartbeat of two souls who had finally found each other in the dead of winter. Nathaniel spoke then, his voice low, almost like a vow. "Tomorrow, if the snow stops, I'll chop more wood. For you, for this house, and for the faith I just found again." Clara met his eyes, her voice tender. "And I'll make more soup, for the three of us." They both smiled, quiet, genuine. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the roof, not cold anymore, but like a lullaby. Inside the cabin, the last ember still glowed, a fragile flame of hope, a quiet proof that even after years of silence and sorrow, hearts could still be warmed again. Scene 5. The Golden Watch. The Secret Unveiled. The next morning, pale winter sunlight streamed through the cracks of the wooden door, laying thin, silken streaks across the cabin floor. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a silent white world so pure and still, it was hard to believe chaos had ever touched it. Clara woke to the faint aroma of coffee. Opening her eyes, she saw Nathaniel crouched by the fire, coaxing the flames back to life, while Tommy sat beside him, stirring a small pot of porridge with a twig. The scene was simple, peaceful, a morning like any other. Yet beneath the calm, Clara felt something stir in her chest, a strange unease, as if a shadow was hiding beneath all this warmth. "Sleep well?" Nathaniel asked, his voice low and gentle. Clara smiled softly. "And you too?" "We slept like rocks," he said with a quiet chuckle. "Haven't had a real bed in a long while." The firelight painted his face in amber tones, kind, calm, yet somehow carrying a weariness that ran deep. Clara studied him quietly. There was something about his posture, his way of speaking, refined, deliberate, that didn't quite match the roughness of a wandering cowboy. A man like him, he carried a story. She shook her head, chiding herself for imagining things. When Nathaniel stepped outside to fetch water, Clara began tidying the pile of damp clothes from the night before. She lifted each garment toward the fire to dry. When she picked up his coat, heavy, worn, but finely made, her fingers brushed over the soft lining and the careful stitching along the seams. It wasn't the kind of craftsmanship made for ranch hands. Then something rolled out from the inner pocket and hit the wooden floor with a soft clink. The sound rang out small but clear, slicing through the morning's stillness. Clara froze. At her feet lay a pocket watch, its golden casing glinting in the firelight. The lid had popped open, slightly spilling warm reflections of gold and red across the room. She bent down and picked it up. It was exquisite. Intricate engravings curled along its edges, and on the back, etched in delicate strokes, were the initials NTHT. Above them, a crest, two deer bowed toward a sword. The design was too fine, too deliberate, the mark of wealth, of heritage. Her breath caught. This was not a poor man's trinket, not something a cowboy would own. She turned it over in her hand, her thumb brushing the clasp. Inside, finely etched on the inner lid, were the words, Thorne Harrison, 1871. The name made her go still. Harrison. Her father had spoken that name before the Harrisons, owners of railroads, lands, and half the valley below. One of the most powerful families in the West. Her pulse quickened. Clara stood frozen, the watch gleaming in her trembling hands. Its golden light flickered across her cheek, painting warmth where confusion and fear began to bloom. She wanted to believe it was just something he'd found or bought secondhand, but the small, cautious voice inside her whispered otherwise. No man carries something like this, unless it's his own. She ran her fingers over the engraved name again. The ticking inside was soft and steady, tick, 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 like time itself counting down toward a truth she didn't want to face. The door creaked open. A gust of cold wind swept in as Nathaniel stepped through snow, dusting his coat and hair. He paused when he saw her standing there, the watch glinting in her hand. Their eyes met. Silence hung heavy between them. Clara's voice came low, trembling slightly. This is yours. Nathaniel's gaze dropped to the watch. For a moment he said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. Yes. It's beautiful, she said softly, though there was an edge beneath her tone. I've never seen anyone carry something like this. Looks precious. He reached out, took the watch gently, and for a heartbeat his expression darkened. It was my father's, he said, simply tucking it back into his coat. I keep it as a memory. The words sounded easy, too easy. But the way his fingers tightened around it, the way his eyes flickered with something unspoken, told her it wasn't the whole truth. Clara forced a small smile and turned away, but her heart was unsettled. Everything she'd come to believe about him, his honesty, his quiet kindness, now felt uncertain. She hated the thought that he might have lied even a little. All day, the air in the cabin felt heavier. Nathaniel still worked chopping wood, fixing the fence. Tommy still laughed and played in the snow. But between Clara and Nathaniel stretched a quiet distance neither dared to cross. Every time their eyes met, she looked away. As dusk fell, sunlight poured one last golden ray through the window, glinting off the clock on the wall. The light shimmered bright, cold, metallic, just like the watch that morning. Clara stared at it, her heart tightening. The glow reminded her of his look earlier, warm, yes, but shadowed by something hidden. She wondered, who had she really welcomed into her home? A desperate father or a man running from his own name? She didn't know. She only knew that as the light caught the brass surface of the watch, something within her cracked faintly like the first fracture of ice beneath a thaw. Outside, the sun sank behind the mountains, leaving a streak of pale gold over the snow. Inside, the fire still burned soft and steady, but the watch on the table gleamed with a colder light. And in that golden reflection, the truth waited silent, patient, knowing that no secret can stay buried forever. Scene 6. Lucas arrives. The clash of misunderstanding. By the third afternoon, the sky had turned the color of lead. Wind swept down from the valley, carrying fine dusts of snow that skimmed across the frozen ground. The little cabin, once warm and quiet over the past few days, now looked small and exposed against the biting gusts. Clara was hanging laundry by the fence, while Nathaniel mended the horse stall. Tommy played nearby, his laughter ringing like a small brass bell carried on the wind. It should have been another ordinary day, until the steady rhythm of hooves echoed from afar. Firm, measured, commanding. Clara looked up. 3 riders were approaching along the slope. The man in front wore a brown leather coat trimmed with fur, his posture straight and confident, a man accustomed to being obeyed. Snow flared up around the horses' legs, white mist swirling in their wake. "Lucas," Clara whispered, her heart sinking. Nathaniel turned at the name, his expression sharpening. He didn't know the man, but the weight of the stranger's presence was unmistakable danger wrapped in civility. Lucas reined in his horse at the edge of the yard. His eyes swept across the scene, the small wooden cabin, the newly repaired fence, the faint smoke curling from the chimney. A smirk tugged at his lips. "Well," he said, his tone smooth but laced with mockery. "You seem to be doing well for yourself, Clara. Word around town says you have company." Clara tightened her grip on the linen in her hands. "What are you doing here, Lucas?" "Just visiting a neighbor," he drawled, glancing toward Nathaniel, who now stood on the porch, silent and still. "Seems my quiet little neighbor has a man keeping her warm these days." Nathaniel stepped forward, voice calm but edged with warning. "We're just sheltering through the storm. That's all." Lucas tilted his head, his smirk widening. "Sheltering, in the home of a lonely girl. How noble of you. Clara, you've grown quite charitable." Her voice trembled but firmed. "I don't need your sarcasm, Lucas. Say what you came to say." He leaned lazily on the saddle horn, his tone turning cool. "What I came to say? Oh, nothing serious. I was just in town, stopped by the bank. Seems your payment deadline's coming due. This land still isn't fully yours yet, is it?" Clara froze. The wind tore the fabric from her hand, sending it spiraling into the snow. I know. And I hear," he continued smoothly, "if you can't pay by spring, they'll take the deed. But I'm a generous man, Clara. I can help you." "Help me." Her voice cracked. Lucas nodded, that smug glint never leaving his eyes. "Sell it to me. I'll pay double what it's worth. You'll have enough to live comfortably. This land's on the new railway line. You won't hold it for long anyway." Clara's eyes burned. "I won't sell." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I figured you'd say that. But think about it. How long do you think you can stand alone? I have the papers, the law, the money. What do you have?" Before Clara could speak, Nathaniel stepped forward. His voice dropped low, steady, as thunder before it breaks. "She has more strength than you'll ever understand." Lucas's smile thinned. "And you are some wandering ranch hand. Or maybe a man on the run." The words sliced the air like a knife. Clara stiffened. Nathaniel didn't answer, his silence said enough. Lucas saw it, and his smirk deepened. "Ah," he drawled, "I see. Quiet, then. I must have struck a nerve. Funny thing about men who hide their names, they usually have something worth hiding." "You've said enough." Clara snapped, anger flaring through her fear. "He's done nothing wrong. You've no right to insult him." Lucas leaned down slightly from his hoarse voice, dropping into a venomous whisper. "No right. You forget who holds your debt, Clara. I'm just looking out for you. The whole town's talking already, a woman alone sharing her house with 2 strangers. Not exactly respectable." Clara's cheeks flushed crimson, part fury, part shame. "Shut your mouth, Lucas." He laughed, the sound sharp and cold as glass. "Just stating the truth. You know how people talk." Nathaniel moved, stepping between them, his stance protective. "Leave. Now." Lucas sneered. "A hero, then. Tell me, when this poor girl loses everything, her home, her name, will you save her?" "You." That was the moment something inside, Clara snapped. All the warmth of the past days, the laughter, the quiet companionship twisted into confusion and hurt. The memory of that golden watch flashed in her mind, NTHT, the way his voice had faltered, the secrets in his eyes. Fear and anger tangled inside her chest, choking her breath. "Leave Lucas," she said, voice trembling. Then after a pause, "And you too, Nathaniel. Both men turned toward her. "What?" Nathaniel asked quietly. "Both of you," she said louder, breaking. "Go. I don't need anyone's pity. I don't need anyone pretending to be kind. I can live on my own." Tommy, standing behind his father, clutched his hand, eyes wide and glistening. "Miss Clara." Clara turned away, tears threatening. "Just go, before nightfall." The wind whipped through the clearing, slamming the cabin door behind them with a mournful creak. Nathaniel stood motionless, face pale, the weight of her words striking deep. He wanted to speak, to tell her everything, but his mouth went dry, his voice lost. Lucas gave a low laugh and tugged the reins. "Told you, Clara. Stray men only bring trouble." He spurred his horse, snow bursting around him as he rode off into the valley, his laughter echoing like mockery. Nathaniel remained where he was for a moment, longer eyes fixed on Clara's turned back. "You think I lied to you?" he asked, voice rough. She didn't face him. "I don't know who you are," she said quietly. Silence. Then Nathaniel nodded, once his jaw tightening. He took Tommy's hand. "Come on, son. We're leaving." Their footsteps crunched through the snow, slow, heavy, final. When they reached the threshold, the wind surged again, slamming the wooden door hard against its frame. Bang! The sound echoed long after they were gone. Outside, two figures disappeared into the storm's white haze. Inside, the cabin fell silent once more, the same lonely quiet it had known before they came. Clara sank to her knees by the door, her trembling hand resting against the cold wood. Everything had gone back to how it was before the empty house, the dying fire, and a heart once more closed against the world. Scene 7. Truth and Regret. By morning, the storm had vanished completely. Snow blanketed the valley in a blinding sheet of white, glittering under the pale sun. The world seemed purified, bright, still yet. Inside the cabin, everything felt muted and gray like ashes after a fire. Clara sat at the wooden table, both hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. She hadn't slept. The wind had battered the windows all night, whispering with every gust the same voice she couldn't silence, Nathaniel's voice, low, steady, and full of pain. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face from the night before, the calm, wounded look when she told him to leave. 3 porcelain bowls still sat on the table, 2 empty, 1 half full, Nathaniel's untouched since he set it down. She hadn't cleared it away. Some foolish part of her wanted to believe that if she left everything as it was, they might walk back through the door again. But this morning there was only silence, and the thin, cold sunlight streaming through the frosted window. The door creaked open. Clara turned sharply. An old man stood in the doorway, snow dusting his white beard and heavy coat. Moses, her distant neighbor from 5 miles away. He rarely left his cabin, not in winter. "Morning, Clara," he said, voice rough but warm. She forced a small smile. "You're out early. The snow's still deep." He stepped inside, stomping the frost from his boots. His gaze swept the room, the empty chairs, the cold hearth. I saw horse tracks leading down the ridge. The man and his boy. "They're gone." Clara nodded faintly. "I told them to go." Moses was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly he said, "Do you know who they were?" She frowned. "Travelers. A father and his son." The old man's eyes softened, pity and disappointment mingling in their depths. "Not travelers, Clara. That man is Nathaniel Thorne Harrison." She froze. "Harrison." He nodded. "The eldest son of the Harrison family, owners of the rail lines, the mines, half the valley below. He's heir to it all." The air in the cabin turned still and thin. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Moses went on, his voice heavy but gentle. He left his family nearly a year ago after his wife died, giving birth to their second child. The baby didn't make it. He walked away from everything, the fortune, the land, the name, and took only his son. People said he'd lost his mind. But I knew better. He just wanted to live honestly, to show that a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns. Clara stood motionless, her breath caught halfway. "But why didn't he tell me?" she whispered. "Why hide it?" Moses looked at her kindly. If he'd told you who he was, would you have opened your door that night? Would you still have shared your soup, spoken to him as an equal, or looked at him as a rich man pitying the poor? The words struck her like a hammer. She couldn't answer. Her mind reeled backward to that first night, the snowstorm, his trembling hands holding the child, his voice pleading. Just one night. He hadn't lied. He hadn't boasted. He'd only asked for warmth, for kindness, nothing more. One night turned into 3, and she had trusted him, seen his heart, until one flash of gold, a name on a watch, shattered everything. Her voice broke. Does Lucas know? Moses sighed deeply. He knows, and he's using it. He's spreading word through town that Nathaniel Harrison abandoned his family, ran away from his duty. Tonight he plans to announce it at the square in front of everyone. If that happens, Nathaniel's name will be ruined. He'll have no choice but to leave these lands for good. Clara staggered back, horror and guilt flooding through her. He'd humiliate him in front of the town. Yes, Moses said gravely, unless someone speaks the truth. And I think there's only one person who truly can. You. Clara turned away, gripping the edge of the table. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Nathaniel's voice echoed in her mind, his quiet words by the fire. His story of loss, the way he'd held his son close, the way he'd said, "Thank you, ma'am," with such sincerity. He hadn't deceived her. He had simply wanted to live as a man, not an heir. And she had sent him away, like a criminal. Tears blurred her vision. The cup slipped from her hand, shattering against the floor. The sound rang through the empty house, sharp, final. Sunlight spilled across her face, pale and cold. The tears glistened in its glow, tiny sparks of warmth amid the frost. "I was wrong," she whispered, voice trembling. "Dear God, I was wrong." Moses laid a hand gently on her shoulder. "Then make it right, child. If your heart is true, there's still time." Clara lifted her gaze toward the window. Beyond the frost, the sun had begun to climb over the mountains, its faint rays piercing through the mist. Light spread across the table, touching the broken cup, the 3 bowls, and the wet shimmer of her tears. That fragile light stirred something within her, a spark that refused to die. No more waiting, no more silence. She threw on her coat and wrapped her scarf tight. The cold hit her as she opened the door, but this time she didn't flinch. From behind her, Moses called out, "He'll be at the square. Clara, if you mean to stop this, you must hurry." She turned, eyes clear now. "I will. They need to know he's not a coward. He's a man who chose kindness over power." Then she ran. Snow burst under her boots. Her breath came in clouds of white against the morning air. Every step pounded with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. The sunlight followed her across the open valley, a lone figure cutting through the endless white, running toward the truth, toward forgiveness, toward the warmth she'd once turned away. And behind her, in the quiet cabin, the light that filled the empty room no longer felt lonely. It was the light of awakening, of hope, rekindled from the ashes of regret. Scene 8. Riding down the mountain, the journey of redemption. The wind howled through the snow-laden pines, twisting the air into ribbons of white mist. The morning sun had vanished behind a wall of clouds, leaving the world steeped in cold, gray light, steel blue and sharp as a blade. The mountain trail wound dangerously along the ridge, crusted in ice, a path that even seasoned riders feared in weather like this. But Clara did not stop. She leaned forward, gripping the reins until her fingers burned with cold. Her brown mare Daisy snorted breath rising in thick white plumes. Each stride crunched deep into the snow, scattering flakes like smoke around them. Her cloak whipped violently in the wind, heavy with frost, her hair tangled and wet. The wind bit her face raw, but she didn't blink, didn't waver. Every hoofbeat matched her heart, pounding, desperate, unyielding. Far below, the valley lay drowned in mist. At its center waited the small town, quiet for now, but soon to gather a crowd. There at noon, Lucas would speak, twisting truth into poison, dragging Nathaniel's name through the dirt. If she didn't reach him in time, he would lose everything, not only his name, but the fragile faith he had fought to reclaim. "No," Clara rasped through the wind. "I won't let him fall, not again." Images flashed before her eyes. Nathaniel standing in the blizzard, his arms wrapped around his shivering child. The warmth in his eyes as he spoke of his late wife. The rough hand that had gently touched hers by the fire. And finally the look he gave her before she shut the door, sorrowful but forgiving. Each memory struck like a blade, sharp, aching. Yet each one drove her onward. The storm, the cold, the fear, none of it mattered. Not anymore. She had lived 2 winters alone, 2 years of silence and grief, and in one foolish moment she had destroyed the only warmth she had ever known. Now she would ride through hell itself to make it right. Daisy slipped on the icy bend snow exploding under her hooves. Clara gasped, pulling hard on the reins, leaning into the turn. For one breathless second they teetered on the edge, then the horse found footing again. Clara exhaled shakily, her lips blue with cold. "Good girl, Daisy. We can't stop now." The wind grew fiercer. Snow lashed at her face, blinding her. The world dissolved into a blur of white. At times, the trail disappeared entirely, sky and earth merging into one endless storm. Still, Clara kept her eyes forward, tears streaming, though she couldn't tell where the snow ended, and her tears began. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low, far off, like the echo of her own heart, wild with regret, burning with resolve. She didn't know how long she'd been riding. Her hands were numb, her legs rigid, every breath a struggle. But in her mind, one rhythm beat louder than the wind, faster. Faster. Before it's too late. Then the final slope appeared, a steep, perilous descent leading down to the valley. At the bottom stretched a frozen river, and beyond it the dirt road that wound toward the town square. Clara stared down, chest rising and falling. The incline was near impossible. One misstep, and horse and rider would tumble straight into the snow abyss. But there was no other way. She whispered a prayer lost in the storm. "Please, God, let me reach him." Then she kicked the reins. The mare lunged forward. The world exploded into motion, wind screaming, snow-blinding hooves hammering the earth. Clara clung to the saddle, leaning low, her heart slamming against her ribs. Ice shattered beneath them, sending glittering shards into the air like diamonds. Her cloak snapped behind her, the cold ripping through her bones. Yet she could only hear the rhythm, 1 beat, 2 beats, 3 heart and hoof together in fury. Thud. The horse hit the valley floor hard. Clara gasped, nearly thrown, but she steadied herself. The wind had weakened. Now the air calmer, heavy with falling snow. She had made it down. Ahead through the haze, the brown rooftops of the town began to form, and above them a single plume of smoke rose from the square. That was where Lucas waited, where Nathaniel faced the cruel judgment of strangers. Clara gritted her teeth, gripping the reins. "Go, Daisy, run." The horse surged forward, tearing through the snow. Behind them, white clouds swirled in their wake. Each hoofbeat was a heartbeat of repentance, each breath a prayer for forgiveness. Above, the clouds began to break. A thin ray of sunlight pierced through the gray, a fragile thread of gold cutting across the valley. It fell upon her, lighting her tangled hair, her frost-streaked face, turning her into a flicker of life, racing against the cold. Clara lifted her gaze. Her eyes burned not from the wind, but from something fierce and alive within her. The storm was still there, but inside her another one had calmed. She was no longer fleeing from guilt. She was riding toward hope, toward redemption, toward the man who had taught her that kindness could survive even the coldest winter. Snow still fell, wind still howled, but Clara didn't stop. Her fingers clutched the reins like lifelines, her breath rising in white clouds that looked almost like fire. And when the outline of the town square finally came into view, she whispered, barely audible over the wind, "Wait for me, Nathaniel. I'm coming." A single tear slipped from her lashes, carried away by the wind, vanishing into the endless white. Scene 9. The town square. Justice rekindled night fell early over the small mountain town. Snow still drifted from the sky, not pure and soft like in the morning, but glowing faintly gold in the firelight of dozens of torches burning around the town square. The air was thick with whispers, horse snorts, and the crackle of flame. People gathered in a wide circle, faces half lit, half shadowed, a crowd not waiting for truth but for spectacle. At the center stood Nathaniel. His collar was crusted with snow, his dark hair damp and heavy, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. Beside him, little Tommy clung to his father's coat, trembling from cold, but more from fear. In front of them, standing proudly on the inn steps, Lucas raised his voice smooth and cutting. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I bring you the truth about a man who pretended to be a humble wanderer, but is in fact Nathaniel Thorne Harrison, the traitor who abandoned his fortune and fled from his family's name." A stir ran through the crowd. Murmurs spread like sparks through dry hay. Harrison, the railroad heir. What's he doing here? Lucas's tone grew louder, triumphant. While we toiled for scraps, he lived in luxury, and when guilt found him, he ran to play the saint among us. But a coward can wear no disguise. He abandoned his father, his home, his duty, the name of Harrison itself. Nathaniel lifted his head calm amid the noise. He didn't argue. He only tightened his grip on his son's hand. Papa Tommy whispered, voice trembling, "They're lying." "Right?" Nathaniel bent slightly, his voice steady and low. "Yes, son, but truth doesn't need shouting to be heard." The words fell quietly into the storm of voices, soft like a spark in snow. No one seemed to notice. Lucas sneered, spreading his arms toward the crowd. "See, he won't deny it. And this woman, Clara, she harbored him, hid him in her home during the storm. Alone. With him. What do you say to that?" A harsh wave of whispers rippled through the square. Suspicion flashed in cold eyes. The firelight flickered across faces twisted with judgment. Tommy began to cry. "Enough, Lucas." A woman's voice rang out clear. Hooves pounded over snow. The crowd turned. A rider tore through the whiteness, her cloak flying behind her like a banner. Clara. She reined in her horse at the edge of the square, breath steaming in the icy air. The people parted instinctively. Snow sprayed as she dismounted, nearly stumbling, but she stood tall, eyes blazing in the firelight. Lucas's smirk faltered. "Clara, what are you doing here?" She didn't answer him. Her gaze found Nathaniel, and for a heartbeat, the noise of the world fell away. He stared back, silent eyes filled with something between surprise and relief. Then Clara turned to face the crowd. Her voice trembled, but it carried like steel through the cold air. "Lucas is right about one thing. This man's name is Nathaniel Thorne Harrison." The crowd erupted in whispers again. Lucas's smile returned. "So you admit it." But she said sharply, cutting him off, "He is no coward. No traitor. He's a man, flesh and blood, who lost everything yet still believed in kindness." Her voice rose, gathering strength with each word. "The night of the storm, he came to my door. He had no gold, no title, only a half-frozen child in his arms. And I opened that door. I didn't know who he was, only that he needed help. That night changed my life." She took another step forward. Her hands shook, but her eyes gleamed like glass catching firelight. "If showing kindness is a crime, then I will commit it every day of my life." A hush swept the square. The torches flickered their flames, bending in the wind. People's faces softened, the sharp edges of doubt melting into something human. Clara turned to Nathaniel, tears glistening on her lashes. "I doubted you," she said quietly. "I sent you away when I should have trusted you. But now I understand you weren't running from your past. You were trying to live your truth." Lucas's voice broke through, rough with fury. "And what of that truth? He's still a Harrison, and your land still belongs to the bank." Clara faced him, her voice clear as a bell. "No, Lucas, you're wrong." She pulled a crumpled paper from her coat, the debt note. "Moses told me everything. Nathaniel paid off my land before he left. This farm is mine. You have no claim here anymore." Lucas froze. The murmurs around him shifted, surprise, then disapproval. Someone spat on the snow. Nathaniel stepped forward, his tone calm, deep, unwavering. "I didn't buy her kindness. I only wanted to give back the freedom she earned herself. Clara looked up at him, her smile trembling through tears. "And I only wanted to give back what you gave me, Faith." For a long moment, no one moved. Then silence gave way to something else. The torches burned brighter, their flames catching the wind. Lucas looked down, jaw tight, and without another word turned his horse and disappeared into the swirling snow. Nathaniel watched him go, then turned to Clara. His eyes were tired but soft, full of something new peace. "You came," he said quietly. Clara nodded, a tear rolling down her cheek as she smiled. "I promised myself I wouldn't let you face the cold alone." Tommy ran forward, throwing his arms around her waist. "I knew you'd come, Miss Clara." She laughed through her tears, holding him close. The crowd around them stayed still for a moment, then one voice rose above the rest. "She's right," someone shouted. "Kindness isn't a sin." Another joined, then another. Torches lifted, high flames flickering like a tide of gold against the dark sky. Nathaniel looked up at the sea of fire, then at Clara. "Look," he whispered the flame. "It's alive again." Clara nodded, her voice low but steady. "It will never die, not while truth and compassion still burn in us." Above them, snow kept falling, soft, silent melting as it touched the heat of the torches. And in the heart of that glowing square, beneath the light of dozens of small fires, 3 figures stood close, a man, a woman, and a child, like a single flame against the winter night, shining warm enough to thaw the cold hearts around them. Scene 10. Spring returns. A perfect ending. Winter had passed. The last of the snow melted into streams trickling down the hillside, carrying away the cold. The valley stirred awake from its long sleep, blanketed in soft green and the songs of returning birds. Clara's cabin was no longer the lonely shelter it once was. The old boards had been replaced, the roof mended, the fence sturdy again. Around the porch, wild roses had begun to bloom, blush pink and ivory white, their fragrance floating gently in the air. Tommy dashed about the yard, chasing a few newly hatched chicks. His laughter rang clear as church bells through the morning light. "Miss Clara, I caught one," he cried, holding the tiny bird in cupped hands. Clara laughed, brushing flour from her apron. "Easy now, Tommy. You'll scare it." The boy giggled and set it gently down in the grass, watching it disappear among the flowers. Sunlight spilled over his tousled blonde hair, turning it the color of honey. Nathaniel stood on the porch, arms folded, his eyes following the boy. There was peace there, the kind that had been missing for a long time. "I've never seen him laugh like that before," he said, his voice low and warm. Clara glanced up the morning light, brushing her cheek soft and rosy. "Children only need a home," she replied, "like trees need soil to grow." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. In his eyes, she was no longer the lonely girl from that snowstorm night, but the woman who had saved him, who had saved both of them with nothing more than kindness. He stepped closer, the scent of wood and wild roses mingling in the air. In his hand was a small box of dark walnut, plain but finely made. "Clara," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something." She blinked, surprised. "What is it, Nathaniel?" He opened the box. Inside lay a simple gold ring, worn by time but still gleaming under the sun. "It belonged to my mother," he said softly. "I've kept it all these years, waiting for the woman I could trust to wear it." "You've given me back that trust, Clara." Her breath caught eyes shining with tears. "Nathaniel." He smiled gently. "Don't say it out of gratitude or debt. I'm asking because when I think of tomorrow, I see it with you." The air stilled. The wind brushed through the rose bushes, sending petals drifting around them like pink snow. Clara covered her mouth, her voice breaking with emotion. In his eyes, she saw everything: courage, honesty, and a love that had weathered every storm. She nodded, whispering, "I said yes, the moment you knocked on my door." Nathaniel smiled, slipping the ring onto her finger. The sunlight caught the gold, making it glow like a promise sealed in light. From across the yard, Tommy shouted, "Father, Miss Clara, you're getting married!" Both laughed. Nathaniel lifted the boy into his arms and spun him around. "Yes, son, we're a family now, Tommy's laughter rang out again, bright and boundless. Clara watched them, her heart swelling with warmth deeper than fire. A moment later, she went inside and opened a small drawer. From within, she took out the golden pocket watch, the very object that had once sown doubt, now shining as a symbol of trust reborn. She wiped it clean and stepped outside, handing it to Tommy. "This belonged to your grandfather," she said softly, "and now it's yours. Keep it. But remember, the most precious time is the time you spend loving and being loved." Tommy held it reverently, eyes wide with awe. "I promise, ma'am." Nathaniel's throat tightened as he looked at them both. "Thank you, Clara, for turning this house into a home." She met his gaze, smiling through tears. "No, Nathaniel, you're the one who brought spring back." A gentle breeze rustled through the roses, scattering petals in soft swirls of pink and white. Across the valley, melted snow ran into clear streams. Buds unfurled and sparrows flew across the cabin roof, singing as if to celebrate a new beginning. Nathaniel took Clara's hand, rough and warm in his own, while Tommy ran in circles around them, laughter echoing across the hills. From the distant road, old Moses stood watching, his weathered face creased in a smile. "3 knocks on a winter's night," he murmured. "Turns out it was destiny knocking." The sun dipped low, painting everything in gold. The cabin, the flowers, the 3 figures standing hand in hand. Clara leaned her head on Nathaniel's shoulder, whispering, "The storm's gone, but I still hear the wind. Only now it's not cold anymore." He squeezed her hand gently, "Because now it carries our laughter." Above them, the wild roses bloomed in full soft against the pale blue sky. Life went on, the seasons turned, and in that little cabin on the mountainside, love had taken root, grown strong, and finally blossomed. No one knows who might knock on their door, a stranger or fate itself. But sometimes the kindness you give in loneliness becomes the miracle that changes everything. What's the kindest thing you've ever given or received? Like and subscribe to hear more stories of healing, from snowstorms to warm homes.